Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, January 28th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Assistant Professor of Government at Cornell University, Jamila Michener. On our Fragmented Democracy, Medicaid, Federalism, and Unequal Politics. Also on the program today, the government's reopened for 3 weeks. And labor is who we should thank. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris announces a plutocrat dabbles and Wall Street freaks out about Warren and Sanders. Nancy Pelosi says, no State of the Union yet. We'll see if you're a good boy. U.S. and Taliban in peace talks. Meanwhile, the Trump administration warns of the gathering Venezuelan threat to the United States. And good news. New Mexico advances voting rights for ex-felons. New York State protects trans rights. North Carolina will get another Democratic state Supreme Court justice. Lastly, Massachusetts Attorney General going after the Sackler family
Don't be premature about that.
For their role in engineering the opioid crisis. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. You know, the Sackler thing is really it's fascinating, and hopefully we'll get to it. But we've spoken, particularly when we go to Vegas for the tort lawyer shows. We've heard quite a bit about the opioid crisis, and I think most of the attorneys I have talked to there have been going after the distributors. There are 3 major distributors. They have a statutory responsibility to report back to the U.S. government when they see spikes and unaccounted for spikes in prescription drugs going to specific regions of the country, which is exactly what that was. Nevertheless, we've heard a lot about the Sacklers. And I went to the Brooklyn Museum this weekend, Sackler Wing. And you're just like, I could not go into the wing, or I could sit down with my kids and say, this is why we're not going into that wing. But it is sort of fascinating. It is the wing there had an exhibit, and I don't know, I think it's like it's been there for a while, this exhibit on feminist artwork, which is, you know, the way that I guess they make themselves feel better on some level.
Wait, did they sponsored the dinner party? Is that where that wing is?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
That whole wing. And you want to go up to, you're just looking around like, there's no, what am I going to do here? Like, I wanted to go up to the security guard and go like, I'm not taking my kids in here because of the Sacklers. And he would have just looked at me like,
You're like, all right. He was like, I think we might have a problem here.
no, it's not even that. It would just be like, yeah, okay. I have no idea what you're talking about. The restroom's right down the hall.
Recommend the gift shop.
But their money is everywhere. And that is I mean, there's a lot of that going on right now, of course, with Davos and the sort of greater understanding of the cost of philanthropy and what it does to our society, et cetera, et cetera. But a good weekend insofar as Donald Trump caved. We were on the air Friday when that happened. And I just want to, make this clear. I think the Democrats did a good job in not screwing this up. I think Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, Pelosi obviously was a positive force, and Chuck Schumer was smart enough to sort of recede, and a lot of this was successful because Chuck goaded him into saying, "I'll own the shutdown." And I think that was a moment that Donald Trump would like to take back, and I think Chuck Schumer is very proud of himself about that, and good for him. But largely understand this. What the Democrats did was they managed not to screw it up, and good for them. They deserve credit for that. But on Friday, 5 minutes into the show, there were reports that LaGuardia, that Miami, and I think Philadelphia airports had to suspend flights for an hour or something. And it was obviously a work action by some of the air traffic controllers. Simultaneously, the flight attendant union put out a statement saying, in response to the FAA staffing shortages, Sarah Nelson, the president of the flight attendants union, said this is exactly what AFA and other aviation unions have been warning about would happen. The aviation system depends on the safety of the professionals who run it. They've been doing unbelievably heroic work, even as they are betrayed by the government that employs them. They're fatigued, worried, and distracted, but they won't risk our safety, so the planes will stay on the ground. This is anything but a sick out. It's only about our safety and the air traffic controllers' absolute commitment to it. Do we have your attention now, Leader McConnell? All lawmakers, open the government and get back to business and democracy to discuss whatever issue you so choose. Shutdown must end immediately. This is the unions associated with the airports basically threatening, we're going to go all in on this. There's solidarity, and this is a veiled threat. And it was not, it was not a glib one, and it was certainly substantiated by, with reality. But it was it goes beyond a threat. It's a promise. Like, look, you drop a hammer off of a building, it's going to fall to the ground. That's what's going to happen. Gravity is going to work here. And then, and we said at the first 10 minutes into the show on Friday, I was like, this is probably going to end by the weekend, because this is the beginning of the end of those people who work at airports who are going to continue to take this. And once the airports go, forget it. Within 3 hours, the government shutdown was over. So, and from day one on the shutdown, I think we said literally from day one, it's the airports, because that's the moment where you start to shut down the government functioning for the wealthy people in a really explicit way, and B, because it is such an easily digestible. It's a national story. It has not. You can see it. If you're in New York City, you can see it when Atlanta shuts down their airport. And so make sure that that credit is where credit is due on this. This was a labor victory. This was about labor power. And it just bookmark this in your minds, folks, because this is indicative of what labor can do. Meanwhile, Mick Mulvaney trying to make the best out of a really bad situation for the administration. I mean, this is, they really lost this one in a big, big way.
They didn't even come out of this with anything to spin. They
No.
just lost. It was just
This
a
was
pure, unmitigated L.
Yes. But here's how they're going to salvage it. I mean, this is the most anemic thing I've ever heard And I can just imagine the idea that they think anybody takes this threat seriously. Look, Donald Trump may go out there and declare a national emergency to fund the wall, but it'll set an interesting precedent. Because I don't think he has any other emergencies he's going to see outside of maybe, Venezuela. But certainly there's some emergencies, I think, on the left that people envision. And if Wall Street's worried right now about an Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders coming into office, wait till they have the emergency powers that Donald Trump is going to provide for them. That should be rather interesting. All right, here is Mick Mulvaney. Let's just keep the picture up, right? We're just going to keep the picture up? Oh, okay. Are you going to keep it on me? All right. Yeah, this is CBS, so we're just going to listen to the audio because they get very uptight about people seeing the images of Mick Mulvaney and who was the host? Margaret
You're not
Brennan.
missing anything.
All right, but here are the pictures of them.
Is the president really prepared to shut down the government again in 3 weeks?
Yeah, I think he actually is.
No,
keep
he's
in
not.
mind,
No,
he's
he's not.
willing to do whatever it takes to secure the border. He does take this very seriously. This is a serious humanitarian and security crisis.
Pause it.
And as
I mean, if we were to believe this, why did he start the government back up? Yeah. If he's willing to do anything that it takes, wait, what?
Just save
Is there
a
a
few
follow-up on
jobs.
this question?
Save a
Let's
few
let's hear
jobs.
it.
President of the United States, he takes the security of the nation as his highest priority. He doesn't want to shut the government down. Let's make that very clear. He doesn't want to declare a national emergency. What he wants to do is fix this the way that things are supposed to get fixed with our government, which is through legislation. One of the reasons he agreed to open the government this week was to essentially take the Democrats at their word. While their leadership had been telling us they were not interested in negotiating and were sort of taking this do nothing and hope the president gives up approach, there were many, many Democrats, both rank and file and some lower levels of leadership, would come to us and say, look, we happen to agree with you on border security.
Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that. I think that's the most anemic thing I've ever seen.
That's also, I mean, even Maggie Haberman had this piece in the Times, I think it dropped yesterday, about how Jared Kushner actually thought, because he was able to move this small and, I guess credit where credit is due, justice reform bill through the House and Senate and have Trump sign it, that all of a sudden he was now like the deal maker and the Democrat whisperer. And she just, in very polite Times language was like, he really underestimated the extent to which rank and file Democrats backed their leadership and their position. seemed to kind of catch him off guard.
Well, it's only been 2 years,
right,
since they've been in office. So
right.
They're still neophytes.
Yeah,
and they haven't quite figured out how Washington works.
Right. I guess Kushner's been talking to Mick Mulvaney.
Folks, has your company outgrown QuickBooks? Are shared spreadsheets, manual processes, and legacy systems costing you time and money? Introducing NetSuite by Oracle. It's the business management software that handles every aspect of your business in an easy-to-use cloud platform. With NetSuite, you can save time, money, and unneeded headaches by managing sales, human resources, finance, and accounting instantly right from your desk, even from your phone. Thousands of the best-known and fastest-growing companies use NetSuite to manage their business. Now it's available to you. Better yet, it's more affordable than you think. Because right now, NetSuite is offering you valuable insights to help you overcome the obstacles that are holding you back free. Don't miss out on unleashing your business's full potential with this free guide, Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth. You'll learn how to acquire new customers, increase profits, and finally get real visibility into your cash flow. Get NetSuite's guide, Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth.
I'm into it.
At netsuite.com/majority now. That's netsuite.com/majority to download their free Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth guide today. netsuite.com/majority. And folks, every 2 seconds, there's a new victim of identity theft, which means a criminal could be spending your money, applying for loans in your name, and even damaging your credit, the good credit you've worked on so hard to build. Unfortunately, you can miss certain threats to your identity by just checking bank statements and monitoring your credit. Good thing there's LifeLock Identity Theft Protection. LifeLock uses proprietary technology to detect and alert you to a wide range of identity threats, like your social security number for sale on the dark web. I checked out my dark web through this. I'm clean.
Nice.
But and I got to say, I was shocked because I've gotten about a half a dozen over the past 3 years, half a dozen from, I don't know if it was, I don't want to say the company, but I think it was my medical insurance company was like, we had a slight hack. And it's possible your social security number could be out there.
How often they give you those messages? Like, nothing to worry about here.
Experian,
our entire system was compromised.
Just covering our ass.
Frankly, you should be able to. There should be massive lawsuits about this. And then they say, oh, but we'll give you a free 6 months of some type of security protection or something. Meanwhile, it's too late. And if you do have an issue involving identity theft, one of LifeLock's identity restoration specialists will work to fix it. Of course, no one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses, but with LifeLock, you get identity theft protection and additional features to help protect your device against cyber threats for as low as $9.99 a month. Don't waste another second. Visit lifelock.com/majority now to save an extra 10% on your first year. That's lifelock.com/majority for an extra 10% off. Lifelock.com/majority. Check it out, folks. Identity theft, super scary. And anybody, I have never experienced it. I have had a family member deal with it, and the mop-up is a huge pain in the butt. Having someone who can walk you through that and be dogged for you, extremely helpful. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, be talking to Jamila Michener on Fragmented Democracy, Medicaid, Federalism, and Unequal Politics. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Assistant Professor of Government from Cornell University, Jamila Michener. She is the author of Fragmented Democracy, Medicaid, Federalism, and Unequal Politics. Jamila, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
It's Michener, so you were pretty close.
All right. Well, I apologize. Welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, all right, let's just start with for folks who don't know, give us a sense of where Medicaid fits in as a program in the structure of government-sponsored health insurance.
Sure. So we don't have any sort of universal government-sponsored health insurance that anyone and everyone can have access to. Instead, what we have is the government helping various subsets of people who have very specific needs and fall into very specific categories. So we have Medicare, which is for elderly people who are over 65, so that you can get health insurance in your old age. And we have, for example, the VA, which is a government agency that provides health insurance and benefits to our veterans. And then we have Medicaid, which is a program that provides health insurance predominantly to low-income Americans, right? So people who are poor and lack resources. Now, that's not in every state. There are some states where you can be as poor as you like and you wouldn't get health insurance. But in many states, if you're at 133% of the poverty line or below, you can have access to Medicaid. And the vast majority of people who rely on Medicaid are living in poverty or very near poverty, and many of those people are also elderly, and so Medicaid covers what Medicare doesn't, and they are also disabled and have other kinds of health challenges. So Medicaid is the program that really provides health insurance for the most vulnerable, most needy people in the country.
And we should say, I mean, just to correct me if I'm wrong, but the VA is also not just provides health insurance, but these are government paid doctors essentially and hospitals.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that is when people say government run health care. We have it. I mean, that is basically it. We just happen to only provide it to our vets and. And my understanding is, too, that the VA actually, Elizabeth Warren came out with a proposal recently to produce generic drugs in certain instances by the government. The VA does that now when there are shortages. They're actually, so they're pretty much all in there. So let's start with this idea of how, now Medicare is, how is Medicare different from Medicaid? Well, I guess maybe I should ask that second. So let's talk about first about Medicaid and that fragmented nature. I don't think people realize how not federally directed Medicaid is. And I apologize for not for doing that like with a double negative, I guess. But explain to us if I'm eligible for Medicaid and go through a state where a state where I may not even there may be no eligibility for me, through to a state where maybe they've accepted the expansion of Medicaid under the ACA. Where does the federal, direction end in terms of that flow of health insurance to a recipient?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the federal government sets the broadest kinds of contours for Medicaid as a health insurance provider, right? So there are some really large categories of things that every state who covers Medicaid beneficiaries, which is every state, has to provide, right? And there are certain categories of people that every state has to cover. And so, pregnant women who are living below the poverty line can receive Medicaid in every state, right? And they can receive coverage for their pregnancy. However, what other things they receive coverage for might vary from state to state. So even if you're a pregnant woman who's eligible for Medicaid in any state, right? Let's say that you live in, Alabama, you will get coverage for your pregnancy and for some things directly related to it, but you might not get physical therapy if you have an injury, and you might not get glasses if you're unable to see. You might not get your teeth taken care of if you have a dental problem, because those things, podiatry, vision, those are optional. And states can decide whether they want to offer those things to any of their Medicaid beneficiaries or whether they want to offer them to all of them. And they have lots and lots of leeway, of discretion. Now, there are some states that haven't expanded Medicaid. And in those non-expansion states, there are still 14 states that haven't adopted the expansion. And in those states, you can be very, very poor in many of those states and not qualify for Medicaid if, for example, you're a childless adult, or even if you're an adult with children in some cases. In the states that have expanded Medicaid, so the other 37 states, everyone who lives at 133 or below of the poverty line is eligible. But even in those states, whether you've expanded or not, states still get to make really specific choices about what they'll cover and what they'll not, that they won't. All states have to cover some basic suite of things, but then all states also have a ton more choice in terms of what they provide and what they don't.
Now, my understanding has always been that the reason why we would not want, from the perspective of someone who wants as many people as possible covered by health insurance, the reason why we would not want the federal government to block grant money to the states would be that it would the rate in which the increase of health care would not be covered, and that two, the state could use it, could redirect money. Like what is the relationship between the money that the federal government makes available and the state? So when you say the state says like, oh, we will not cover podiatry, for instance, are they getting the same amount of money per potential recipient as another state that may offer podiatry, and they just simply decide, oh, we're gonna put it on respiratory stuff as opposed to podiatry? I mean, how does that work? How does the money how does the state restrict in that fashion?
Yeah, so what Medicaid, in terms of the funding, the federal government allocates or matches a certain amount of money, and it varies across states, and it depends on how much the states spend, and it also depends on the states themselves, for example, and how high poverty is in the states and a number of other factors. But the federal government essentially will cover. There's a kind of, it's called the Federal Medical Assistance Percentage, the FMAP multiplier, but it's the kind of the percentage that the federal government uses and determines that they will match and cover of all that the state spends. So, states have to make decisions, because it is true that the more that they spend, the more that the federal government will cover for them. But then they're left covering the remaining percentage of the cost for Medicaid beneficiaries. So, the less they spend total, the less their leftover percentage is. And, how much that percentage is varies from state to state. And so states have to make pretty complicated decisions about how much they can afford to spend and how much they're currently spending. The thing about the real challenge with block grants is that, states right now, treat Medicaid as, and Medicaid is, it's really an entitlement. So states have a lot of decisions to make about who's eligible and who's not. But once they make decisions about who's eligible, every single person in that state who's eligible gets the benefit. And that's because no matter how much a state spends, the state can decide everybody's eligible below this certain amount. And right now that amount is 133. So even the states that have the most generous eligibility requirements, they decide we're going to be generous. The federal government will match that up until the place where they say they will, which is 133. And so those states can be really generous, and they can count on the federal government to match their share, to cover the share that they said that they will. And they have to cover the rest. But everyone in that state who qualifies based on those eligibility criteria will get Medicaid. That's what really an entitlement means. It doesn't mean anybody feels like they're entitled to anything. It just means everyone who fits the criteria gets the benefit. If we were to block grant Medicaid, states would have a capped amount, right? And that capped amount would increase over time, but it wouldn't increase at the rate of cost. And it would mean that when states ran out of money, like when they ran out of the money that the federal government gave them, they ran out and there's no more money left. And so one of the things that happens under those circumstances is that people stop getting the benefit. It's not something that you get because you're eligible anymore. You get it if you're lucky enough to get it before the state runs out of the bundle of money that the federal government has given them. And so that often will mean that states have to pull back, that they have to offer less, or they have to cover fewer people. And then there's the big problem of right now, states get compensated based on what they spent. But if states just get a fixed amount and it's given to them, right, there's an incentive there. Well, now we know that we're getting, whatever the amount is. We're getting $1 billion from the federal government. Let's try to find ways of spending less, right? Now we have a surplus, and maybe we can do some other things with this. Maybe we can redirect it. We know that's what happened with TANF, with the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, when it got block granted. Now, states just get a big old pile of money, and they start getting creative about how they use that money, and they use less and less of it for the core purpose of the program, so that we know now states are using TANF funds to do all sorts of things, to fund college scholarships for middle class and upper middle class students. They just make up reasons to spend the money on things that they want to, because block grants give them even more flexibility than they already have. Fewer resources to help people with, but more flexibility to misuse those resources.
Right. Okay. And so we should, I mean, in some respects, just to restate, in some ways right now, Medicaid is like an economic stabilizer, like food stamps. There is a formula as to who is eligible. And if you have, let's say, a financial crisis and more people lose their jobs and more people dip into poverty, more people are going to be eligible, and the money will be there because the program will expand with the need, as opposed to the need being constrained by whatever we decide is an arbitrary number that we're going to fulfill that need with.
Yes.
Okay. And so
that's exactly right.
And then the block grants on top of that not only have that problem, but as you say, can easily be diverted by states that don't have an interest in providing for the least fortunate in their state. It's easy to pick out at least 14 right now that are almost openly hostile to those people based upon their refusal to pick up the expansion. But all right, so how is that different from as it is now, where you have a state that says, like, okay, we're going to take care of X number of our people, and we can't exactly say how many of those people there are, but we're going to set the formula at such a place where we anticipate it'll cover about X number of people. And the federal money will cover 80% of that, let's say, or 90% of that, and we'll have to make up that 10%. We can have that line item in the budget. It'll make it look like we're humane people to some respect. How is Medicare different? Is Medicare is that parceled out by the state as well, or is that a direct federal benefit?
Medicare is a federal benefit. So with Medicaid, it's intergovernmental. The states are covering part, the federal government is covering part. And how much varies across states depending on several factors, but it really is a shared responsibility between the states and the federal government. Medicare is not a shared responsibility. The states do share some responsibility in terms of administering Medicare, right? So if you are an elderly person and you have a problem with your Medicare, there's a local office that you can go to talk to someone about it, and that's in your state. So states help with administration. But when it comes to where the funding for the program is coming from, it's coming from the center. It's coming from the federal government. And what that means is that, A, that it's more generous, B, that it's more reliable. It's much more difficult for Medicare to fluctuate, whereas with Medicaid, it goes up and down with state budgets. When states are having a hard time, when they're in some sort of an economic recession or having some sort of financial trouble, they can cut Medicaid. It's an option because there's a portion of it, a large chunk of it, that they're directly in control of. Medicare doesn't work like that. It's a much more stable and reliable program because its structure is nationally based and not federated in the same way that Medicaid is.
Okay, and your research, we started getting closer to like the heart of your research in terms of what that difference in that dynamic does to people's perspective on the program and in government more broadly. But lastly, like, how is it that why is it that way? Like, why, when these two programs were developed, was there this distinction?
So this has been a part of the kind of broader struggle around providing people who have needs in the United States with what they need. You know, the way that we approach helping people, whether it's with their health needs or other core social needs in this country, has always been pretty piecemeal and fragmented. And so there are some groups of people that are viewed as desirable, and we want to help them, and we want to help them in ways that are generous, in ways that are consistent, in ways that are equitable and fair. And elderly people fall into that category, right? Who doesn't think of most elderly people as the kind of, group that you want to help? Nobody wants to see old people sick or struggling or living in poverty. And so they're a sympathetic group that, for a long time, American social policy has been oriented towards helping, and helping in the most stable, equitable way possible. Now, other groups of people, for example, people who are just poor, they may not be elderly, they may not be sympathetic in any other way, but they're poor, they lack resources. And our general policy approach in this country towards people who are living in poverty is that we tend to give them as little as possible, and we tend to have programs that help those people vary a lot across space. We want states to have a lot of choice, a lot of discretion over how they treat their poor people, right? And part of this is part of American political culture and the way that we think about people living in poverty and the kinds of policies that we make for them. But it's been baked into Medicaid from the very beginning. And so Medicaid and Medicare actually came from the very same piece of legislation. But the way that legislation wrote the kind of policy, it set apart Medicare in one way and Medicaid in another. And that was largely a function of who the programs are serving, who their kind of targeted populations were. And when your targeted populations are people that we all feel good about and want to help, well, then you get policy that's more fair and consistent. And when your targeted populations are people that, maybe some of us are suspicious of, we don't think they work hard enough, we don't want them using our taxpayer dollars, we don't want to sort of have them be supporting their quote-unquote dependency or whatever other tropes that we might have about people in need. When those are the targets of the policy, well, then we get very different policy. And that policy tends to not be as consistent or stable or generous.
How, and again, I'm sorry, we're a little bit tangential, but I think it's important because it really sets the table for people. But how racialized was that decision? Was it extremely racialized or just incredibly extremely racialized?
Whichever one is more. Incredibly,
yeah, right.
Extremely. I mean, anyone who pays enough attention to U.S. social policy and the history of that policy knows that race is baked into all of these decisions. from the decision makers themselves and what state they came from and what their commitments were based on that, to the policies that were precursors to Medicaid. So before Medicaid emerged, there were lots of policies that were precursors to it that were sort of a beginning. There's a whole chapter in my book about the history of this. And, over time, we're just trying newer and newer ways to target our benefits to the people who we like the most. And Black and brown people are almost never in that category, right? And even when they are in the category, we try to divert benefits away from them, even if they are elderly or they are veterans or they are pregnant women. And that's one of the things that the state flexibility gives us. It means that in places, for example, where African
states' rights, right? I mean, I mean, that's basically the whole narrative. States' rights usually means, if not always, means how much are we allowed to discriminate against our people of color is really what it comes down to.
That is exactly right. And that's happened in all domains of social policy, including health policy, from the very beginning of the time that we had any policy. So it's impossible even for me to tease out all of the kind of racial threads that can be woven when we think about Medicaid and health policy more generally. It's just ubiquitous. It's always there.
We've talked on this program a decent amount with folks who have written extensively on just the premise of Social Security also being highly racialized. And so, 35 years later, I guess, when they're doing Medicare and Medicaid, it's, what was old is new again and so on. In fact, I'm also struck that when we often talk about Medicaid and we talk about Medicaid cuts, the most salient political rhetoric is usually, or the one that gets the most traction, is often the statistic that 2/3 of our elderly who are in nursing homes are there because of Medicaid. So people spend, as you get older, obviously you have less assets. You at one point run out of money and you must go into a nursing home. You become eligible for Medicaid. You get sort of like shuttled from Medicare to Medicaid, and then you're in a nursing home and Medicaid is paying for it. That ends up being a big political talking point because, of the way that we have a structure around the narrative around, I guess, the morality of being poor in this country, or living in poverty, I should say. All right, well, let's talk about, too, the research that you've done. What are the implications from for this fragmentation on its recipient's perspective on government? Because one of the things that we also have heard is if you are on Medicaid, and one would think it would be different, but it's not, you are less likely to vote. Now, part of that is a function of poverty makes it harder to vote in many respects. But is there more to it than that?
Yes, there's more to it than that. So when I first started looking at some data, and initially it was quantitative data, it was survey data, and I saw this large pattern, Medicaid beneficiaries being less likely to vote. And it made perfect sense to me. These are folks who are living in poverty, and we know from lots of research, from decades of research, that they're less likely to participate in the political process because there are all sorts of barriers. And so I wasn't terribly surprised about that. But there was a part of me that also wanted to know, does Medicaid itself have anything to do with it? Is it about the nature and the characteristics of the people who are on Medicaid, things like poverty, or is there more to it? And what I found was that there was more to it. And I found that by looking deeper into quantitative data, into survey data, and thinking about how to control for things like poverty and lots of the things that we know are associated with it. And one of the things that I did, for example, was that I looked at a survey called the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Survey that has nearly 10,000 people. And many of them, over 50% of them, are Medicaid beneficiaries. So I had lots of a sort of large sample to consider. And I looked at people who took that survey who were Medicaid beneficiaries and people who were not, but who were very similar to each other in many other ways. They were similar in terms of their level of poverty. They were similar in terms of their race, similar in terms of many aspects of their life circumstance. And what I found was that this relationship between Medicaid and not participating in politics as much, not voting and not engaging in other ways, didn't go away, right, as a result of, the folks who were Medicaid beneficiaries, when compared to their counterparts who were similar in many, many other ways, were still less likely to vote, even though the only observable difference between them was being a Medicaid beneficiary. And then what I did was I started talking to a lot of Medicaid beneficiaries to try to figure out, why would this be? Is there something about Medicaid? And what they told me again and again in many different ways, and I talked to beneficiaries from across the country, is that their negative experiences with Medicaid did affect the way that they thought about government and politics and their willingness and desire to participate in politics. And one of the things that the kind of fragmented nature of Medicaid, like we've been talking about, that it's different in different places. Well, Medicaid beneficiaries know this very well. They're the ones who told this to me and brought the sort of the theme of this book to light for me, because they talk about how, their parents in other states or their brothers in other states on Medicaid had one thing and they had another. Or they talk about how much Medicaid changed over time, that 5 years ago they were able to get benefits that they couldn't get now. Or they talk about how they moved slightly across the border to a different state and figured out they couldn't get something that was hugely important, or that they thought about moving. And when they researched to make sure they'd be able to get life-saving benefits in other states, they found out they wouldn't. And this sends a really clear message. It sends a message that says your value and your needs aren't anything that will be responded to on account of you being a member of this broader political community or a citizen of the country. It depends on what state you live in and on how that state feels like treating you. And sometimes it depends on what county you live in, what neighborhood you live in, the kind of experience you have with the program, the kind of access you have to hospitals, to doctors, to benefits. And this kind of motley mix of contingencies, people feel it in their everyday life, and they know what it means. They know that they're the kind of people who aren't guaranteed anything, who aren't protected, even for this most basic set of health benefits. And people read those messages and they feed those messages into their calculations about whether they should bother taking part in the political system, whether their voices are important and will be heard and responded to. And for the most part, Medicaid beneficiaries don't believe that, although it's worth saying that varies. That in states that are being generous to beneficiaries, where benefits are consistent and where bureaucracies are well staffed so that people have positive experiences, and where benefits are expanding, we know that participation is more likely to happen, political participation. And in states where those things aren't the case, participation is less likely to happen. So the story isn't that Medicaid makes people not participate in politics. The story is that the kind of experience that people have with the program, which depends on decisions that states and localities make, can affect our democracy, can affect whether the voices of those folks are heard.
Do we see a difference in their for those folks, particularly ones who are, I guess, states that are more or less generous, I guess? Do we see any distinction between their voting patterns in federal versus state elections?
So in the data I have, I couldn't distinguish between, for most of the data, I couldn't distinguish between federal and state elections. I could, however, distinguish between state and federal elections and local elections. And what I found is that, the decreased likelihood to participate spans across all of those different kinds of elections. So it's not sort of limited to what's happening at the national level. So it's not as though people are thinking, well, my negative experience with Medicaid, I won't participate in national politics, right? Instead, it affects the way people think about politics across the board. Part of it is that some of what's going on is really local, and people are thinking about this in terms of both in terms of their states and in terms of, the federal government, and sometimes even more local than that. And so it affects what people are doing across the board, and even beyond voting, like even whether or not people will participate in a local political group or attend a local political meeting. Just even the basics of democratic engagement are sort of eroded when people are alienated from the government on account of experiences with getting a very basic benefit, which is health care, right? So a lot of people think, I'm not asking you to pay my bills or to give me food. I want to be able to go see a doctor. And if the government doesn't see me as important enough to provide that, then why would I be important enough to participate in politics and to think that that would matter at all, that anyone at any level of government would listen to my voice?
So, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but the more that you cut Medicaid, the less likely its recipients are going to respond politically in some ways, right? I mean, that's the message being sent to some of these. That answers the question why we have 14 states that don't have an expanded Medicaid.
Yeah, I mean, the research record on this is growing stronger every day. So there are a few studies that came out last year that showed that states that expanded Medicaid in the wake of the Affordable Care Act, that people were more likely to vote immediately in the wake of the expansions, right? So we know that expansion boosts voting. And it boosts voting, especially in places, for example, that have high concentrations of poor people. So we have reason to believe that the boost is coming from the very people who are getting the benefit. And the opposite is also true. When you retract benefits, when you take things away, people are less likely to vote. I show this in the book, and then I also have another paper I recently wrote with a colleague that will be published soon, that looks at a specific case, looks at Tennessee, because they made huge cuts in the mid-2000s and kicked hundreds of thousands of people off of their Medicaid program pretty quickly and pretty quickly without much warning. So we look at the election before and the election right after to try to see if there'll be any differences that aren't accounted for by lots of other things that we can measure and control for. And what we find is in the wake of a big set of cuts, people are the aggregate voting rates are significantly lower, right? So, there's more and more evidence in more and more forms, whether it's from talking to people about their experience or looking at different kinds of big quantitative data that shows that, people are less likely to vote when you take away their benefits. And we would hope for the opposite, that people see that they're losing something important to them and they get out there and they push back and they punish their elected officials. And we think that's how democracy should work, that when you take things away from your constituents that harm them, that those constituents will push back and that will end up harming you politically. But that's not the way that it appears to work when it comes to Medicaid. Part of the reason is because people get alienated, they get discouraged, right, and they get sent very specific messages that they then listen to.
Right, and this is part of a broader narrative, right? I mean, if you're poor, you deserve to be poor, you're irrelevant, and we're going to cut your Medicaid just to remind you of all those things that we've been trying to signal to you for decades, if not longer.
Yeah.
And so how much do you think, well, I guess I have two questions about your data. One is, how much do you think there have been politicians who are aware of this dynamic, if not, so specifically in terms of a qualitative sense, but they had an intuition or they had anecdotal sort of evidence of this? A, how much do you think that's the case? B, are you worried that, I'm running for governor in Kentucky? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut, I'm running for reelect. The way for me to do that, cut benefits. That's going to work for me two different ways, right? It's going to suppress the vote in some areas, and it's going to probably, I'm going to get appreciation from people who don't like people of color, getting, Medicaid phones or whatever it is that they think that they're getting. I mean, how much do you worry about those two dynamics? Obviously, the second one, you're an academic. I understand the mission is to bring out the truth, but I just wonder how much you think this information has been or will be weaponized.
I do worry about that. And I think two things. I think the two questions are related. I don't think that to many sort of political folks, this is anything new, right? I think that there's an intuition about these sorts of things that comes from the clear evidence, right? That, for example, they could kick hundreds of thousands of people off Medicaid in Tennessee, and the next election, that governor stays in power, right? And so there's lots of evidence over time that people can take pretty kind of harsh turns against programs like Medicaid and not necessarily suffer many consequences politically. And so I think intuitively or in some way, a lot of elected officials probably suspect this, right?
Right.
I also think that the folks who want to take these benefits away would want to take them away whether or not it was going to be a political bust or a boon for them, right? So they're likely going to behave the same way, whether they know this or not. It may give them a little bit more glee knowing this.
Right.
But what I focus on more, and one of the things that I try to think about when I think about who to take this research to and who to disseminate it to, is focus on the way we can use information like this for good, right? I think for any research that is produced, there are people who can misuse it, who can weaponize it, and there are people who can use it for good. And I think part of what I try to do is think about, what does this mean? There are organizations out there that mobilize and support Medicaid beneficiaries. It's great for them to know this and to have a sense that one of the ways they can be supporting Medicaid beneficiaries is politically, right? Not just providing them with economic resources, but thinking about helping them register to vote and helping them to be aware of political issues. I've talked to, and spoken with hospital associations, primary care providers, all sorts of folks who say, wow, we never thought about Medicaid in these political terms, and this shapes the way that we want to approach our patients or our clients going forward. So I try to think about who can use this for good to offset the efforts that are already going to be made to dampen these folks' voices,
It seems to me the answer to how, what's interesting about this is that from an ideological perspective, that liberals want to create a safety net. Medicaid is an important liberal institution. It was the biggest accomplishment, it seems to me, the expansion of Medicaid was probably the single biggest achievement by the Obama administration, specifically within the context of the ACA. That Medicaid expansion was probably the most important part of it, although I think there's an argument about the patient protections broadly speaking. But that is considered a liberal solution to this problem, right? We're going to have we're going to make sure that we have a safety net for people, but the efficacy of that safety net is inhibited by that perspective and not making it a universal program, right? Because the idea is almost like the way I hate to use this as an analogy, but it's the way they hid bad mortgages, right? Ones that had more risk, which is you put it in bigger tranches and it's harder to get at those. So if the idea is that Medicaid was set up specifically as a separate program from Medicare so that you could cut it, really, right, and diminish the benefits for essentially people of color and more broadly people living in poverty. The idea is you make a universal program, and those people are made safer. That the liberal the liberal agenda is more fulfilled with a more socialistic, for lack of a better word, universal program. Right? I mean, this is the best argument for universal health care, it seems to me, in terms of the poor, because it protects that portion of the population as much, if not more, than any, because they're more susceptible to getting their benefits cut.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic debate among people who are trying to figure out how to help the most needy with social policy. Do we target to them, which often is much more politically feasible because it's less costly, or do we try to create universal programs that cover everyone, which is more politically sustainable, because you can't isolate the poor people's programs and try to, pick them off one by one. And it's a classic and difficult dilemma. I think that a kind of universal approach to health policy is preferred, is better, and is, it's a more sort of effective fulfillment of the kind of liberal vision. It's one way of thinking about it, but it should be a more a more effective and more compelling fulfillment of what should be everyone's vision for Americans to be able to be as healthy as possible on terms that are equitable. A lot of people just don't realize that what state you live in, what race you are, how much money you make, these are things that will determine your access to benefits that essentially decide whether you could live or die. I don't actually think that even people who understand themselves, many at least, to be Republicans, would say that that's right, could actually think of a moral grounding for that sort of policy design. I can't fathom what the moral grounding is. There are kind of fiscal and practical grounds, right? Oh, we don't want to, spend this much money. But the moral grounds for the arbitrariness of the whole system, even for many people who are doing everything right and working hard, you just happen to live in the wrong state. And so I think that there's a liberal case to make. I think that there's a human case to make. And I focus on Medicaid in my research because Medicaid is the institution we have. And so let's think about how to make it the best we can. But, in the sort of backdrop for me is always, let's think about how to build new institutions that are more inclusive, more equitable, and more politically and economically sustainable. And that will mean looking beyond Medicaid and looking to a universal system.
Jamila Michener, the book is Fragmented Democracy, Medicaid, Federalism, and Unequal Politics. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will have fun and at least a half of a program.
We'll discuss some compromise and Bernie material, too.
Compromise.
Yeah, we will get to that. Oh, but wait a second. Before we get to that, now look, our fans, our audience of this program are very dedicated, and they start projects, want to make you aware of them when we can and when we're made aware of them. And this one, look, I would not say to support unless you're in a position to easily support. There are certainly more important endeavors out there. However, we would be remiss, and I don't want anyone to accuse us of censoring anybody or stifling debate, because this is almost a debate topic too. Not only is it about a debate, it's almost a debate topic. But apparently, now wait, is this a video?
We have a new video from Bullprog, which is about, it's a song that Dave Rubin should debate Sam Seder.
Oh, well, I was talking about what I understand was a fundraising. Do we have a link to that?
It's in the sound polls.
Okay. Now, why don't we play the song? We'll play the song after we show this. Michael just informed me.
I was informed of this in the, there's a special channel in the TMBS Discord called the Open Exchange channel, and this came to me as a special breaking alert for an ideas forum.
Now that's not my favorite picture, but a beggars can't.
I think
choose.
for purposes of this, I think they went in the right creative direction.
That's fine. That's fine. There is a GoFundMe entitled "Debate Sam Seder Billboard in Los Angeles." There is an image of a billboard. Apparently, it's a picture of Dave Rubin and a picture of me, and it says, "Dave, you can't hide forever. Debate Sam." And we scroll down. Let me read what it says here. We are trying to raise awareness of the fact that that political commentator Dave Rubin is still ducking Sam Seder for a long overdue debate. We will be purchasing a billboard in Los Angeles near the home of the Rubin Report to bring attention to this crisis. Billboard design is not final. Okay, there you go. Please offer suggestions in the comments And how much are they looking to raise? How much does it cost to get a billboard in Los Angeles? $4,000. Now they've made it to 76. Now they don't get to pocket this money. This is one of those things like it's got to be they make the goal, right?
I think on GoFundMe it's a you make the goal. Or
No,
I
think Kickstarter is you have to make the goal, but GoFundMe I think whatever you get. You get.
Is there a? I mean,
that's pretty
wait,
awesome.
Wait a second. Are we sure that this is real? That someone's going to actually like? I don't want anybody.
If you're doing this and it's fake, stop it.
Yeah, you stop that right now if this is fake.
Chris Johnson from Queens, call
Forest
into the show
Hills,
today.
Queens. We'll go out there and find you. We'll get on
I think you should make a commitment that if you don't get to the goal, then
you'll become maximum patron levels of all of our shows.
Right. If you don't get to the goal. Right. Oh yeah. You gotta do the billboard. I mean, I think that's. I just want to say, I think it's childish, and I think it's obnoxious, and I think it's certainly in keeping with the spirit of the discourse that Dave and I have. And so
that is certainly true.
It would be super
funny.
fun.
We just didn't want to suppress this guy's ideas.
Yeah.
Is the bottom line.
That would be super, super funny. But let's just round it out with a left is best. Dave Rubin should debate Sam Seder by Bullprog. And we'll head into the fun half.
This Thursday instead of Tuesday, TMBS.
Right.
Thursday, starting at 6.
No State of the Union this week. We thought it was going to be.
It was all scheduled anyway. So Bill Fletcher Jr. on the Sudan uprisings. We'll talk about Venezuela. Unlocked illicit history of the BJP RSS and how it leads to the Tulsi Gabbard candidacy. Become a patron, patreon.com/TMBS. Literally a few tickets left if you want to come Friday on the homepage.
Also, you can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget, too, that justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Literary Hangover.
House of the Seven Gables exported last night for YouTube. It'll be up this afternoon.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
I saw your subreddit, and they seemed sort of angry. I don't know.
Well, I don't even want to get into that. They were that wasn't my own thing. All right, whatever.
Really?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Hey, Dave, this is a very brave move on your part. Kudos. Have you heard about the SJW nonsense on the...
Dave Rubin is going to absolutely need to be exposed.
Look, I encourage all of you to go fan trolling of Dave Rubin.
Competition would start kicking in.
There was a video, and then there was like 14 videos. So a lot of people made mixes of this.
Our friends, creative, awesome people on YouTube, it's basically everybody.
We got a ton. And here's another. Debate Sam Seder. Debate Sam Seder.
Why don't you just run to your safe space, Dave?
Debate Sam Seder. Debate Sam Seder. Fucked up again. Damn it. I just want to say, Dave, I do respect you.
It's going to be good, folks.
Not.
Right. How can you say that?
It's funny. Yes.
Jesus.
Yeah. Left is best.
Left is best. Left is best. Left is best. Left is best. Left is best. Left is best.
Who's laughing now, Sam?
Just a reminder, it is your support that makes the show possible. Does not get less mature than this, folks.
Bullprog is a genius. I mean, everybody.
Wait, was that a picture of Brendan at the end? Yeah. Brendan, what is that from your high school? Wait, no, wait, right at the end there. Oh my God! They rated Brendan's high school yearbook.
Where is it?
Oh my God.
That was my headshot they took of me when I was at Fusion back in the day.
Oh my God.
If you look closely, that photo's kind of funny. I shaved that day, but totally forgot the area below my lower lip. There's a little soul patch in there. It's covered by the text.
Oh, I like
Nice,
that.
nice.
That is genius. I want
That was great.
to.
Are we in the fun half now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I want to download that.
You put that on.
I'm going to put that on my iPhone.
Can we put this stuff on Spotify? How would we do that?
I think we'd almost, well, the easiest way would just be to release it on the podcast feed. So then it shows up like the
Oh,
podcast
right.
episodes.
That's what we should do. We should put out like a couple of feeds.
Put them on the weekend.
On the weekend of just the songs themselves so that people can play them on Spotify. We can put them on our MR playlist because we have like, 10 of those songs now.
Oh. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if you can put podcast episodes on playlists, though.
Really?
Yeah. I'll look
That's
into that.
absurd. Is there no way to put amateur music on Spotify, or does it all have to be?
You need to do licensing. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. It's a real shame. That's a real shame.
We could get that guy that was trying to start InfoWars Music.
yeah.
I'm sure.
I want to pay that guy to sidle up next to Sam and order a beer that's bigger than his face.
Sam, we got Microsoft Music here. I've been working on. I moved to Brooklyn.
Yeah, I moved to Brooklyn. I'm really excited. Dave Rubin won't debate you. We should talk.
Let's go to the phone. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm good. Good. Very, very happy about the announcement on Friday, even though it wasn't an announcement, but it was a leak, and I think it served the same purpose.
I don't know about
also have
that. I don't know about that,
Go ahead.
but I'm I'm a little skeptical of that story in particular, but who knows? But let's continue.
Well, why are you skeptical?
I just I don't think that was coming from Bernie's camp. I think that came from outside of Bernie's camp. But that's why.
Okay, well, but Bernie hasn't denied the story, right?
That's correct. I think there's a pretty good chance that he could be running, but I just don't know that was from Bernie's camp.
Okay. Well, I mean, you know Josh Orton, right?
Yes, I do know Josh, yes.
Okay, because he made a statement also that saying no decision is imminent, as opposed to denying it.
Right.
And so yeah, okay, all right.
Great.
Okay, so yeah.
Great talking to you.
Yeah, I also have an announcement about I'm going to be having my own channel on YouTube.
Whoa! All right.
When are you going to put out your Dave Won't Debate Sam remix, John?
Yeah, it's called The Cacophonous Hoedown. So anybody who's interested, if you could subscribe to my channel. I haven't put anything up yet, but it's still, in the works. So anyway, just wondering what your thoughts were, Sam, and also on the Harris announcement. And I'm wondering also what you feel about Harris, how well she's going to do in the South, and since the primary in California is going to be on Super Tuesday, do you feel she's going to be she's going to do well enough to where she's going to get a large amount of votes in California?
Yeah.
She in Iowa, New Hampshire, and in South Carolina.
I mean, I think she's going to be very competitive. I think she is. It's early to tell, but if this race comes down between 2 or 3 people, I would imagine that she's going to be one of them. I mean,
well, one of the things.
I mean, I think
one of the things that we were.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that we were speaking of a few weeks ago was that the people from the middle of the pack haven't really done that well. So I went back 10 elections, and the only 2 that actually have won from the middle of the pack were Clinton in 92 and won the nomination, and then the caucus in 88. So I mean, the history doesn't bode too well from people who aren't in the top 2 at this point.
Right.
So okay, all right.
And I'm trying to think who was in the top 2 in 92. I mean, it would have been Tsongas, right? Was probably strong early on in 92, but he had. It came out that he had cancer during the campaign, right? So there was some sort of like, yes, but there was questions. There was a lot of questions that loomed over his candidacy.
Did Harkin poll well early because of Iowa? Did he have like home field?
Do you remember who was in the lead
Harkin,
in 92?
I think, won Iowa out of the gate.
Yeah, I think Harkin won in Iowa.
But who was in the lead about a year out from Iowa?
Well, Cuomo would be, but he didn't run.
He didn't run.
But I'm sure Cuomo
Yeah, right.
was.
Right. I mean, Harkin was doing real well also. So, yeah.
Yeah,
But,
I think Kamala Harris is going to be going to be, if there's 3 people who are going to be vying for it, by this time in 2020, she will be one of them. If there are 2, I suspect she will be one of them.
Do you think her lack of being specific on issues so far, do you think that's going to hurt her? When the debates first start up, or do you think she's going to continue to be vague all through the election?
I think
because right now everything she's saying is very vague.
There's nothing that helps you be vague more than having 14 other people on stage with you. Okay, and so the thing about this is that when you have this many people who are going to be debating, if you want to hide from specifics, I'm not saying she wants to. I think right now, I mean, she has come out and she is, this is early in the campaign. This is where there's a lot of sort of like platitudes and whatnot for most candidates. Although, for instance, Warren has come out with proposal after proposal after proposal at this point. But for certainly the lane that I think Kamala Harris is running in, and which is, a little bit more towards the center of the Democratic Party. She has been, she's talking in like sort of broad strokes, protecting democracy, making, America more inclusive. I mean, she's not talking about policy in a dramatic way. She came out with a set of issues, but she's not getting that policy heavy. The debates, she won't have to, not until it's down to 2 or 3 people. Which is, for someone like her who's going to be running on more like charismatic appeal and on sort of like broad themes, that's helpful. So we shall see. It's going to be interesting because ostensibly Warren and Sanders are going to introduce a lot more policy to the sort of the race, I think, than, we have generally seen in the past.
I think if Booker runs, he'll try to distinguish himself as like the center-left policy
technical,
wonk.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's going to be interesting to see, like, it's quite possible that in the early stages of this race, it's going to be more like Booker, Gillibrand, and Kamala Harris, going after each other than Bernie and or Elizabeth
really
Warren.
Hopefully that Sanders and Warren should. I mean, I think it's great if they, obviously, I think there are real differences, I've said a million times, between Sanders and Warren, but I also think conversely, they should be, if he announces, which I think obviously we all know, I hope he does, and I think he should, and I think he will, but there should be some type of armistice of like, there should be a lot of moments where amongst their disagreements, they remind everybody that like, hey, you know that Politico piece that came out where basically Wall Street is excited and happy about everybody else on this stage besides us? That's the basic dividing line. And we have our disagreements, but we're in some sense collaborators here.
I would be surprised if that's not the angle unless they end up, again, in this time next year and they're the only 2 people on stage.
Well, that's great.
But right,
that's the best case scenario.
Right. So I think Kamala Harris is going to be pretty formidable. I don't, for me personally, I have problems with Kamala Harris's work as a prosecutor. And I want to be explicit about this. And John, I appreciate the phone call. And let us know when your YouTube is up, and we'll push it a little more. Thanks for calling in.
All right, thank you.
I have Kamala Harris. I want to play both these videos. Here's Kamala Harris making her announcement. 20,000 people in California there for the announcement. That's a big number, ladies and gentlemen. That's a super big number. And she's going to be a formidable candidate. There's just no doubt about it. Here she is. Again, if things can change, but she's running a very sort of broad themed campaign. This is not going to be a steeped in policy. This is going to be, her campaign is going to be about broad liberal visions. She is not terribly ideological as far as I can tell. And in many respects, very much like Obama's gambit, and I think of all the candidates in the race so far, I think she is, Biden would obviously be like that too, to a large extent. I think he's going to come in and just talk about restoring America to America and broad principles. She seems to be running out. Here's her a clip of her speech from Oakland this weekend.
When white supremacists march and murder in Charlottesville or massacre innocent worshipers in a Pittsburgh synagogue, that's not our America. When we have children in cages crying for their mothers and fathers, don't you dare call that border security. That's a human rights abuse. And that's not our America. When we have leaders who attack public schools and vilify public school teachers, that is not our America. When bankers who crashed our economy get bonuses, but the workers who brought our country back can't even get a raise, that's not our America. And when American families are barely living paycheck to paycheck, what is this administration's response? Their response is to try and take health care away from millions of families. Their response is to give away $1 trillion to the biggest corporations in this country. And their response is to blame immigrants as the source of all our problems. And guys, let's understand what's happening here. People in power are trying to convince us that the villain in our American story is each other.
Okay. I mean, it's impossible to disagree with any of those sentiments, but it's also possible to say that's not terribly specific. And now, look, it's an opening speech. Maybe she will pivot into, but I suspect we're going to hear a lot of this. It's not quite, there's no red America, there's no blue America, but it is broadly speaking, I would hope every single Democratic candidate feels quite strongly about we shouldn't have KKK people walking around like we do now. And I imagine we're going to even hear that if there was a Republican primary, we would hear that.
Theoretically.
But with that said, this video came out today too, or at least is making the rounds. I don't know if
it's making the rounds today.
This is from the Commonwealth Club, which is I'm not even sure the Commonwealth Club. I know that
It's sort of like, isn't it kind of almost like a West Coast like press club almost type of thing?
I think so. Well, here she is in 2010. Now, look, I am not one of those people who believes that you should be disqualified because you're a prosecutor. Had Elliot Spitzer not turned out to have certain private moral deficiencies, and even then, I would have loved him to run for president. I want prosecutors who will prosecute white-collar criminals. That is hugely important. In fact, it's one of my critiques of Kamala Harris that, we've talked about on this program way before anyone anticipated she would run for president as a freshman senator, when we were talking in the context of Steve Mnuchin, who there were people in her office who had developed at least what everybody perceives as a reasonable argument why this guy should be prosecuted, and he never was. But when I see video like this, it's a little bit more disturbing because it's not hard to figure out the policy implications of this. Now, we just spoke to a professor Jamila Michener, who wrote about why Medicaid is so susceptible to being implicated by the states. And it basically comes down to a highly racialized situation where people living in poverty, people of color, are just simply, berated for being in that position in our society. And you don't have to be a white politician to take advantage of society's predisposition to believing that people living in poverty have a moral deficit. Anybody can do that. A lot of people have spoken about Barack Obama, who one of the advantages he had to being black was that he didn't have to talk about race in the way that Hillary Clinton did. And Hillary Clinton was punished in some respects electorally for talking about race so much. What Obama did was pursued what they call the politics of respectability. And instead of saying systemically we have a problem in this country that has inhibited people of color's progress in our society, that there is some type of moral failure that they have. We got to be our brother's keeper. This is an individual problem. This is people not stepping up. And this is more of that, but almost worse. Here's Kamala Harris at the Commonwealth Club in 2010.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school. So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, usually the job comes with a badge. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime. We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Yes, we achieved intended effect.
I don't think that's funny. I think that's extraordinarily punitive and creepy and shows such a... I mean, this is the first time, obviously I object to her policies because we have different politics, but that's the first time I've just been really creeped out and disgusted. And I want to just say, I think it's important because I think obviously there's going to be a lot of echoing of Obama's campaigns, but I think we got to go back and look at Bill Clinton's 1992 campaign as well, because on one hand, where maybe it's a positive because of the new political terrain we're in with Bernie and AOC, Clinton's 92 campaign at least had a semblance of economic populism, which she's going to need to put forward, and she did that, but she did it in a very Clintonian way, like, you know, if the CEOs are getting a raise, then America ought to get a raise, which is a very gentle way of putting it, but it echoes that. But then people also, you know, remember that, I mean, Bill Clinton's triangulating on crime and race issues were horrifying. He literally stopped campaigning to execute. Yeah, I mean, you were going to say, but he literally went back and executed a mentally disabled black man to prove I'm a different kind of Democrat. So I think, and if the polling bears this out, because you've been saying this, and I think unfortunately you're right, a lot of us are, you know, if you're on the left, you're very concerned about the the prison industrial complex and over-sentencing and the Sesta Fosta stuff, which she's also been incredibly bad on. But I think that what you might see from her is a fusion of Obama and 92 Clinton, and 92 Clinton not just with the sort of like soft economic populism, but actually some, if it calls for it, some very heavy triangulating on criminal justice issues. And I just think, if you know anything about poverty or anything about people trying to get their lives together in a certain way, that clip is mortifying, profoundly disturbing.
What's also interesting is that she talks about running for re-election in San Francisco. Now, she's trying to make the jump from San Francisco to the state in 2010. And that's what, you know, everything that we have knocked Andrew Cuomo for is really what that move is. I'm coming from San Francisco politics. There's a reason why they say that, hippy dippy, that type of thing. I've got to show that I am serious, that I can have some type of like conservative, moral sort of stance. And that's what she's talking about there. And she's bragging about it. She says, like, you know, I had to alienate some of my core people on some level, my staff, like, hey, this is morally wrong what you're doing. Maybe they all were like, hey, this could hurt you in your re-election chances in San Francisco. I mean,
but maybe some people on her staff were actually like, this is incredibly abusive, classist and racial, and maybe we should like have some basic integrity in how we do our jobs. Maybe
I'd be curious to see if that, and I don't know how you break that out. I mean, it was clear that the school board was also attempting to that. But even if it was effective, which I question whether it was effective, I don't know. But even if it was effective, there's a lot of things that we could do effectively by threatening people to be arrested, and that don't make it right. And that is a little bit disturbing. So, you know, we'll see. But here is another candidate about whom I think this guy's going to go a lot less far than Kamala Harris, in my estimation. And in many respects, I don't know why.
Oh, this guy.
I don't know why you would need a Joe Biden in the race with a Kamala Harris in the race. But here is Joe Biden proving that even though he's only 24 months out of the office in the White House, he might as well be decades removed from where the Democratic Party is today. And frankly, Americans, broadly speaking, because I don't know if he has, visited the Senate lately or the House or any state houses or any political arena. But this guy's a little bit tone deaf. Now, he is defending not just going to a speech and supporting a Republican in Michigan, I think it was, Upton, right? But it was also revealed earlier in the week that he was paid a couple $100,000 to do it. And, he wasn't paid to endorse this guy. He was paid, and then he endorsed it there. That was part of, he delivered. Let's put it that way.
I get in trouble. I read in the New York Times today that that one of my problems is if I ever run for president, I like Republicans. Okay, well, bless me, Father, if I have sinned. But from where I come from, I don't know how you get anything done. I don't know how you get anything done until we start talking to one another again.
Well, I mean, one of the ways that the Obama administration got stuff done was by having a veto-proof majority in the Senate and controlling the House and having the presidency. In fact, I think that's the only way things got done, as far as I could tell, during those years. I don't know if he remembers Merrick Garland or the empty Supreme Court seat, but that is Joe Biden basically announcing, look, I may or may not jump into this race, but I can assure you I am not going to in any way have a sense of what's going on politically right now.
Well, I'd also like to take him up on his challenge and talk about some of the things that he did get done in a bipartisan basis in his career, like expand prisons, write one of the most repressive criminal justice bills in history, which Bill Clinton signed.
Achievements.
Yeah, great achievements, like help shepherd the invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush. And everybody, look up the credit card bill that Joe Biden wrote. Not only is it it really is just one of the most naked, it is just a one-to-one, I'm a senator from Delaware, the credit card companies want this will harm tens of millions of people. There's no clearer example of just pure corporate bagmanship. But then also look contemporaneously at Elizabeth Warren explaining why it's one of the most obscene pieces of legislation imaginable.
That's what got her into the into politics, I think, largely.
Right.
But let us also, as long as we're critiquing people now, Bernie Sanders has not entered the race officially, or really, in any way. But who knows? I think there's a decent chance he will. At this point, certainly not quashing any of the speculation. But when Bernie enters the race, he is going to have to contend with his past. And there has been a video. We saw a video earlier of Kamala Harris from 2010, sort of bragging about threatening to jail parents whose kids don't go to school enough. Here is a trip, apparently, that Bernie Sanders took to the Soviet Union in 1988, which, if you'll recall, is supposedly in an era when we were trying to culturally make inroads into the Soviet Union. But God help us, is this the way you do it? He's at a dinner, and he's shirtless.
David Cross was also there?
Yeah, that was not David, the young David Cross. In 88, I can assure you David Cross had hair. Big curly fro. All right, here, let's listen to this. All right. Oh, there's Bernie Sanders on the right there, leaning in without a shirt on.
When people sit at the same table at the party, and one side of the table starts singing a song, and you have to face them. When they finish it, the other side has to sing their own song. What are we going to sing? As the director said, added to Victor's was...
All right, pause it. I think what it is there's a Russian woman there, and she's saying when one side of the table sings their song. So this is a mixed Russian and or I should say Soviet and American meal. They have all sorts of wine bottles out there, I guess, to sort of hide the fact of what they're really doing, which is supposedly eating. And they are switching songs back and forth. All right, continue.
Today, the distinctive feature of our economy is competition. This land was made for you and me. This land was joy. That ribbon of highway, our song of peace. I saw the Lord.
There's more footage of Bernie Sanders there. There's a sign, First American Pizza in Moscow. Wow.
Bernie Sanders is so cool. Everything you learn about him, he just gets cooler. Also, can we say...
Well, wait a second.
He's ageless.
Wait a
He looks
second.
the same back
First
then.
off, the idea that you would be wearing no shirt at dinner is disgusting. I'm sorry. We're not going to let Bernie Sanders skate by this. There's a reason why they say no shirt, no shoes, no service. I don't know if he was wearing shoes there. I don't know why you would if you're not going to wear a shirt at the dinner table. But I hope enough people see this.
Never gone to... Yeah. It'll be really damaging. This is, by the way, just like his point of reference. Isn't this... This was in 88?
Yeah.
So this was 2 years after Mikhail Gorbachev and Reagan tried to get rid of all of the world's nukes at Reykjavik. So, like, how bizarre, like, how out of the mainstream that, like, at a time when, like, Esalen Institute is facilitating cultural diplomacy and all sorts of direct relationships are forming to end the Cold War, that Bernie Sanders would do this. I mean, it's very damning.
Oh, I can explain to you what was going on.
Is this going to involve a Jonathan Chait theory? Okay, Jonathan Chait. The year is 1988. A young KGB officer named Vladimir Putin calls a meeting with a young Burlington mayor who already looks like a grandpa and a real estate developer from New York City named Donald Trump. Putin knows that by 2016, late-stage capitalism will be ruling America. You will run from left against Hillary Clinton's.
You know who was here at this time?
This is the Jonathan Chait column.
Louis Gohmert.
Oh my God.
This land was made for Vladimir Putin.
At first, it was a commitment to socialism, but then it became a commitment to Russia as a country. Donald and I had our marching orders.
I saw a tweet by someone who's an editor at Wired, and I've read stuff from her before, and I thought, oh yeah, no, she's a pretty good writer. And I still, for the life of me, can't figure out if she wasn't joking. That the implication is that Sanders' entire campaign is a Putin project.
Yes.
There's a lot of people going after Bernie supporters online right now in the way that they're saying that it's an organized front for Russia.
It's that's pretty...
Frankly, could use to be a little bit more organized this time.
Exactly.
But yes, it's definitely for Russia.
Russia, if you're listening, release more emails.
Release more emails. Tad Devine did good ads, but he was a little sloppy with the Ukraine stuff, for God's sake. Not exactly good PR.
Really, I got a little disturbed by the whole thing.
Yeah, I can't even keep up with
No,
news.
but
That's just so awesome. Bernie's so
look.
cool.
I think there are people. Obviously, we talk a lot about the people on both sides of that 2016 election
Who lost their shit.
But I honestly think that, some people thought Hillary Clinton had Parkinson's and that Seth Rich was rubbed out by the Clintons.
Did you hear that
releasing...
Kamala Harris has sickle cell?
But
look at it.
But the idea that there are people who genuinely believe that Bernie is some type of Russian agent is pretty stunning.
Can I give another? And this is actually another good sort of political callback moment. And look, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm basically going off of watching the War Room documentary. But Bill Clinton, when he was a Rhodes Scholar, he took a road trip into the Soviet Union, right? And they tried to make that was the thing. They tried to be like, what kind of young American protests Vietnam and wants to visit the Soviet Union?
Right.
And there's actually a great clip in that documentary where James Carville's like, who was, the best Clinton operative. He's like, what are you talking? He's like, we played them a basketball, man. Are you people crazy? And it's so funny that some of the same contingent of those Clintonistas are now like, it's like, hey, you were right back then. You were supposed to be engaging with the Soviets, you idiots. We should be engaging with all of our enemies. That's a good thing.
Lastly, as we do our roundup of the of what's happening with 2020, this will be the last time we talk about it, hopefully for the day.
Wow.
This is stunning. Howard Schultz, the guy that you've never heard of before, really the past couple of weeks, the CEO or former CEO of Starbucks, is convinced that America is crying out for him to run for president. Is this the hypothetical? Does he say, I'm not going to answer a hypothetical here?
Yes.
Okay. This is stunning. Let me tell you something. Howard Schultz is so rich that the laws of running for president are not going to even come close to requiring him to do anything other than say that he is going to be great. Here he is.
Just the whole philosophy of Howard of maybe redistribution versus growth. And I'm not sure that the stock market is necessarily the barometer you want to look at either. But it's possible this year we grow above 3%. And there's maybe a lot of reasons why that's going to happen. Maybe it was set up by the Obama administration. But for 8 years we didn't. Never had a year. We barely got to 2%. So there's this never-ending argument about whether growth and letting the private sector have more capital, keeping it in the private sector and letting that grow the pie, or whether redistribution is the way to go. I mean, if we end up growing at greater than 3% this year, would you repeal the Tax Reform Act? Would you raise taxes on corporations back to where they were if you were president?
Well, I don't want to talk in the hypothetical about what I would do if I was president, but let me try and say this in my own way. I think the greatest threat domestically to the country is this $21 trillion debt hanging over the cloud of America and future generations. And the fact that interest rates are going up, we're going to be paying close to over $400 billion in interest expense, which I think is the number one or number two issue in terms of federal expense.
So wait a second. So he's not going to engage in a hypothetical of like what I would do as president, right? All of that is, I'm not going to, it's a hypothetical.
Ask me when I'm president.
You got to ask me when I'm president. I'm not going to give away my plans right now. It's exactly what the other candidates would like me to do because they're just going to adopt my proposals. On top of which, not only am I not going to tell you what I'm going to do as president, all I'm going to do is tell you that the biggest problem we have is something that we would have to solve by me doing the thing that I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to do when we're president. And so I think this interview is over. Just vote for me.
What I love here, and because I think we said earlier, or maybe I guess before we are on air, that this is obviously some form of like threat from the oligarch class to not nominate Sanders or Warren. That's probably like the most rational interpretation of this delusion. But apparently they're not all on the same page. Because Mike Bloomberg, in an act of just pure, raw, negative campaigning and not focusing on his own ideas, has tweeted out, in 2020, the great likelihood is that an independent would just split the anti-Trump vote and end up re-electing the president. That's a risk I refused to run in 2016 and we can't afford to run it now. And it links to a longer memo.
Can we pull this up?
Here, I'll send a link. But I mean, the fact that
Mike Bloomberg is the voice of reason. Mike Bloomberg is policing you as a fellow oligarch, I think you should listen. I mean, it's interesting because I do think that what this move by Schultz is a way of basically opening the door in the event that there's a candidate that the oligarchs are concerned about.
Definitely.
And the idea that Mike Bloomberg would shut that down now.
If I didn't run, you can't run.
Yeah.
I didn't do it, you won't do it, you roaster, you loser.
I could never sit in my mansion surrounded in money and know that someone with a couple of $1 billion less than me ended up being president when I could have done it. So
I love how the ultimate diss of these people is like, I voted for Bernie Sanders over you. That's how big a loser I think you are.
If I can't have the presidency, no billionaire can have the presidency.
But whatever, back to credit where credit's due. This is his statement.
Good for him.
Totally.
Good for him.
Legit good for him here.
I'm not going to be president, so you're not going to be president, you son of a bitch.
An official statement from Michael Bloomberg. I'm not going to run as a centrist independent and become president, so you're not either. And all of the same people that tried to scam me for consulting contracts in 2016, you're about to lose out on a bunch of money because I just canceled Howard Schultz's dumb fantasy.
Give me a break. You sold coffee. You're going to have a cafe owner as president? I'm going to be president if anybody's going to be president. And I will not answer your hypotheticals.
I do like that part.
There you go.
A specific question. Fuck that. Trust my business experience.
What's great, though, is that Schultz, the way in which, though, like the billionaire oligarch argument is all the same. Like, of course, Trump is a racist and a xenophobe and an idiot and a demagogue, but actually the core point there of like, I'm not going to answer any specific questions. I'm a wealthy businessman.
Right.
That's all you should know. Same thing. Same argument.
Why don't we just compare our bank books and that's who gets to be president, you son of a cafe owner?
Oh, well, I was the guy who made things a grande instead of a large. Well, boo-hoo! I created a financial terminal, you moron!
I have a suggestion for you. Get me a coffee. How about that?
Yes, that's Mike Bloomberg. I want the full name spelled on the cup. And no, I don't have enough time to talk about race relations with you, barista.
Bloomberg should kick the Starbucks out of the Bloomberg building.
Yeah, he should.
You're getting evicted.
It's a Dunn Brothers now, you slob.
Oh,
meanwhile, it does feel like the Trump administration is thinking that a war in Venezuela, I mean, I don't even know what that would look like. I guess it would matter like
absolutely horrifying. It might actually also, unlike the fake lying one, legitimately create some type of region-wide migration crisis, which God knows the Bolsonaro government would already respond to obscenely what's already trickling out of Venezuela.
But here is Mike Pompeo. And look, there's a lot of reasons in terms of the domestic politics you could imagine why the Trump administration would want to get involved in a war. Now, I happen to believe that as effective as these things were back in the day for distracting the American public, this is just not going to cut it. So here's Mike Pompeo in front of the United Nations, sitting behind him, if I'm not mistaken. Is that Elliot Abrams behind him?
Yep, Elliot Abrams is the point man on Venezuela for the administration.
Now, I don't know if people remember Elliot Abrams. Well, let's listen to what Pompeo says first.
The United States stands with the Venezuelan people. So far, Many other nations have chosen to do the same, and they too have recognized the legitimate government of interim President Guaido. The United States stands proudly with you as we stand together in support of Venezuela. You knew the Venezuelan people did not have a moment to spare. And now it's time for every other nation to pick a side. No more delays, no more games. Either you stand with the forces of freedom, or you're in league with Maduro and his mayhem.
There you go. The forces of freedom. Where have we heard that before? Elliot Abrams sitting behind here. We just keep that image of him up there because this is like Elliot Abrams was Reagan's point man, or one of them, in the Iran-Contra affair. He just coincidentally was pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush, and ultimately, I think Herbert Walker Bush avoided his implications or being implicated in that scandal. Elliot Abrams was also one of the early architects of the Iraq War. He was, I remember one particular story where he had called in a bunch of evangelical Christians and basically told them that we need to do this. And they were, I think, upset about maybe this was endangering Israel in some way. And they're like, oh, no, we need to do this because of the apocalypse coming, something to that effect. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm quite sure that during the Reagan era, Elliot Abrams was implicated as a guy who was in who was helping with death squads.
He helped
down
in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, across. I mean, this guy's crimes and facilitation of just brutality and mass killing in the Reagan era in Central America is unparalleled. And it is like, and also, I mean, him and Otto Rice played a major role in the Bush administration's Latin America policy too. But there is just something like, you know, there's no even pretend that the end game that they're envisioning is death squads and mass cleanup if the right wing takes control in Venezuela.
He was running like in Congress. He had some role. He wasn't in Congress. He was part of the Reagan administration, and he was basically trying to make sure that I think it was Guatemalan. I think it was the Guatemalan president. I think he was president. Could get funds because he was accused of basically trying to kill off indigenous people in Guatemala.
They did.
And he was trying to make sure, running interference in Congress to make sure that funds were not cut off to him. I mean, there's more, and I got to go back and
he
read.
Specifically tried to whitewash a massacre of 1,000 men, women, and children by U.S.-funded death squads in El Salvador. That's the main big, the big one. The Guatemala stuff is real. It was indigenous villages. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, the young girl that was recently killed or died in ICE custody, if you recall, one of these, she was indigenous. She wasn't Spanish speaking.
Yes.
I think that might be the same group that we were supporting massacre in the 80s. So, I mean, Elliot Abrams is one of the great criminal, just obscene, disgusting people of our time. And of course, he helped finance the Contras as well.
We talk about accountability for these people when they're in office and why it was so dangerous that that Barack Obama basically said, turn the page on this. Part of the problem is metaphorically, you're not holding the elite to account, and it can create more problems in the future. The other problem is actually really practical in that they bring these people back again and again and again. Steve Mnuchin ends up being Treasury Secretary. He should have been in jail.
And that should really, look, again, I think, ironically, the lane that's staked out on opposing a coup and supporting a diplomatic process is moderate and obvious. But a lot of Democratic leaders have still gone on board with this. And a lot of even, liberal commentators are prevaricating and playing false equivalencies. And, it should have been obvious you never support a U.S. coup to begin with. But the Elliott Abrams role should be, I think you should be done.
Should be red flaggy. But now the good news, we're told, about America's, sort of beating the drums for a war with Venezuela, basically what would creating a civil war with Venezuela, it seems to me, is that it would bring this country together. You don't believe me? Ask Hugh Hewitt, MSNBC contributor.
Word cloud. The next 33 weeks allow the opportunity to go big and solve this. Jared Kushner is leading it, and it is far more important to shut down the Maduro government than our government. And I think Donald Trump is leading there, and he is winning there because of Bolton and Pompeo going down to see Bolsonaro and Duque. That's going to happen. That's going to bring us together.
That is going to bring us together?
I think America
getting involved in a Latin American politics that has never gone well for the United States
absolutely, because
in years past?
Russia is against that.
I understand
Trump is for that, and that will help. That will help a lot.
I think that
All right. There's
how is this man allowed on television?
There's Chuck Todd basically saying, the subtext of which is like, are you out of your mind? That's going to, I think what Hugh Hewitt's trying to say, like, that should be a distraction. If we see Donald Trump actually like getting involved directly in Latin America, and I saw a report earlier that said that we had gotten involved in the past 100 years or so from a John H. Coatsworth, Harvard Review of Latin America. From 1898 to 1994, the U.S. government has intervened successfully to change governments in Latin America a total of at least 41 times. That amounts to once every 28 months for an entire century. Now, let's take a look at how Latin America is doing, right? Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Society has, in many respects, civil society has broken down in many respects. That's why we see so many people from these countries trying to, risk everything to get out of those countries.
There's waves
Mexico.
of it, right? We go back to the 50s and Eisenhower, those infamous like Guatemala coup, and the 70s, Chile's the big thing. But then through the 70s and 80s, we helped fund, they're called the Condor years. We literally helped right-wing governments coordinate the mass murder of everybody on the left. And not just, of course, I feel like I shouldn't even need to make this distinction, but just this point of clarity, not just leftist guerrillas were they slaughtering. They were slaughtering, first of all, any villages where those guerrillas might be, but also slaughtering the equivalent of Rachel Maddow. Like, I'm a liberal and I have some qualms with the government. Well, you're going to get a bullet in your head from the regimes that we supported. And even as one example, like the Brazilian regime we supported through the 80s, it's always reported here that they killed less people than rivaling regimes, and that's partially true. But what isn't included in the estimates is mass slaughter of indigenous people.
Right.
And now we're on the next wave of it, because there's no doubt that the U.S. foreign policy shifted towards reversing the pink tide. And in 2009, when Obama and Clinton signed off on that coup in Honduras, that was the reversal, and that shows up in Brazil, and they never stopped trying to undermine Venezuela. The sanctions on Venezuela have been vicious under Bush, Obama, and obviously Trump.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Well, Sam, this is Jeff from Georgia. How you doing?
Jeff from Georgia. What is happening? Are we going to see you at the end of this week?
Yeah, actually, you were going to see me. I'll fly down on Thursday, man. In fact, there's already some people already out there. Ames from Australia, all the way there.
Wow.
Already in Queens. I heard a bunch of people. We all gonna meet up. It'll be fantastic. I can't wait to go to my books show that night. What's odd is what I'm calling about, which is something that's gonna be happening at the same time that I'm in Brooklyn. Actually, I will not be in Georgia to experience this, but we got some news here. I don't know if you or anyone of your programs is familiar with Stone Mountain. You guys know what Stone Mountain is?
Yeah. Is there? What is? Is it? Yeah. Tell us.
Stone Mountain's big old. It's probably the most horrendous Confederate monument in the entire country. because it's not just a statue; it's a big old bas-relief carving on the side of a huge granite mountain, which really sucks if you're talking about removing it. Anyway, the news is we got some actual KKK, some actual Nazis. They're about to rally there that Saturday. A couple of years ago, they tried to rally. Yeah, they tried to rally there. Only about a couple dozen of them showed up. About 200 counter protesters. So they outnumbered about 10-1, which was good. Hopefully, that's going to happen again on Saturday. And if I may be so bold, if people are interested in the history of Stone Mountain and a little bit more about what's happening there, I did do a little podcast episode about it on my channel. It's at distantpez.com if y'all want to check that out. But the gist of it is there's an organization called Flower United. It's not really an organization. It's more like an organization of organizations. They're supported by people like the Metro Atlanta DSA, the Atlanta Anti-Fascists, the John Brown gun clubs throughout the area, that kind of thing. They're at flowerunited.org. They're coordinating all the activity. There's a bail fund there for anybody who gets arrested. If anybody's interested in that, and they're woefully underfollowed on Twitter. So if y'all want to check out Flower United, that would surely do my heart some good, because I really appreciate what those people do. I think it's very important when these people try to rally in public and whine about how hard white people have it, that they are confronted by a broad coalition of activists of different areas that they're into, all show up and let them know that we ain't about all that, Sam. Got no time for that nonsense.
Well, beautiful. Appreciate it. People can check it out. Dissident Peasant. We'll see you later in the week, Jeff.
See you, man.
Thanks, man. Calling from a 443 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Oh, hi, Sam. This is Peter from Maryland.
Hello, Peter from Maryland. What's on your mind?
So I know you were saying that you didn't want to talk about 2020, but I just wanted to discuss a little bit more of it.
Okay.
But so anyway, so I kind of have to disagree with what you said about Harris, and the fact that basically I think so. I heard from Jordan from that basically that like before she officially announced that she basically met up with Clinton supporters or donors, I would say. And basically she did that like on the hush hush. And I think once that's basically revealed, I mean, people think that Clintons are basically toxic to start with, so I can't really see why.
So wait,
think that
your argument is that when people find out that she met with Clinton donors, that's going to hurt her in the primary?
Well, right. Basically, just like all the establishment candidates in general, all basically went to Wall Street.
Yeah, well, my understanding is there was a story that Gillibrand, Booker, and Harris did. I mean, look, I personally agree with you, but I don't want to say this too specifically. I'm not convinced, frankly, that well, first off, you should recall Hillary Clinton got a lot more votes than Bernie Sanders did. I mean, there was a lot of people willing to vote for her in the Democratic primary. I mean, she was a more popular candidate amongst Democrats at that time.
I mean, to be fair, the primary was raised in her favor.
Okay. Don't say that again or I'll hang up on you, because I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. The only thing that was rigged in her favor, there was an attempt to rig it in her favor, and I think it actually cut against her, was the way that the DNC scheduled the debates. Okay? There is no other rigging of the election. Did they want her?
When I mean rigged, I don't mean like they changed votes or anything, but I'm
Right.
just saying it was
And
very
and not only did they not change votes towards her, they didn't have the ability to do anything that would drive more votes to her. There was a half a dozen people in the office who wanted her to win. And the only thing that they had the power over was the debate schedule. And I'm quite convinced that ended up hurting her, Now, it's possible Bernie could have gotten more popular, but that is not why Bernie lost. All right? But now, with that said, the fact is, wait a second. The fact is, there was a lot of Democrats who voted for Hillary Clinton. The idea that your average Democratic primary voter, if they hear that that Kamala Harris is going to the same fundraisers as Hillary Clinton, is going to dissuade them from voting for her if they're inclined to vote for her, it's bizarre. It's bizarre.
Well,
it's not.
I wouldn't say it would dissuade, but I'm saying there's the stigma that the Clintons have nowadays is a lot more toxic in a way than it was in 2016.
But I think it's for them.
People,
I think if Hillary Clinton ran today, I think the vast majority, not the vast majority, but certainly the majority of her supporters would be like, "Don't do this." I think they would be.
Yeah.
I think they would say that the moment is past. You got screwed, and but don't do this. But I don't think they're going to say that about someone that Hillary Clinton thinks is good. They're not going to say that about Kamala Harris because any more than they would support Kristen Gillibrand because the Clintons are mad at her for saying that Bill Clinton should have resigned, right? Like I don't think Kristen Gillibrand is going to get a lot of votes because Hillary Clinton is not supportive of her, and I also don't think that Kamala Harris is going to lose any votes because Hillary Clinton is supportive of her. I just don't think that's going to happen. And I think to tell yourself that suggests to me that you need to get a better sense of where Democrats are, because if someone like Warren or you support someone like Warren or Sanders, you need to be smarter in terms of how you sell them to these other Democrats. Because it's not, I can assure you, saying that Hillary Clinton donators are going to support Kamala Harris is not going to keep one person from voting for Kamala Harris that was going to vote for her before. I don't think. I just don't think.
So let me rephrase it in another way to say it. So basically, obviously, it looks that Kamala Harris is basically the establishment darling in a way, right? Would you agree with that?
I think it's starting to shape up that way. It's a little bit early, but I think that's
right.
You're not
So
going out on a
point,
limb, but yeah.
Right. So basically, the point I'm making is that the fact that, and I'm just going to point out the obvious, that she's a black woman is basically a way that the establishment can basically just go either people who oppose her stances are basically either racist or sexist. And basically, that's the way that I see it, in a way, in that if you bring up the stuff, like I just mentioned, with the Clinton stuff and then her prosecuting history, that basically they're just going to, be outraged with that kind of stance.
I think if you bring up the Clinton stuff, it's going to be just silly. Okay? I think the prosecuting stuff is legit. I think the idea that she gets money from Wall Street, legit. I don't think it's helpful to bring up Clinton in this context, because I think people who imagine that someone's going to change their vote based upon a realization that someone is in good favor with Hillary Clinton, I think is deluding themselves.
Can I say this? I will say this in terms of talking to normal people. There are some people who love and worship the Clintons who think that they do something for people that they do not. And then there's people who totally hate the Clintons who think that they detract in ways they do not. I'm just agreeing with Sam. It really doesn't matter. And I would watch, I put up a video, we did, this one happened to be for TMBS, but I think we actually covered this similarly on Majority Report on Thursday. You're going to have to be really smart about how you talk about Kamala Harris because of some of the dynamics you've identified. But
let me
just focus on Wall Street and prosecution and other relevant issues. That's it.
And I think the idea is that bringing up there are people who just assume, and I think it's really a mistaken assumption, It's one thing to say that, like, okay, Clinton is not, lost, and there's no reason to try and revive Hillary Clinton. But it is a mistake to assume that those millions more people who voted for Clinton over Bernie Sanders didn't want Clinton to win. And it is a delusion. And rather than even litigate that point now, I would suggest to you that keep that to yourself, because it's not going to be effective. Anybody you who even is slightly interested in that line of reasoning is not going to vote for Kamala Harris anyways. And so I think the idea is, yeah, you could talk about the prosecutorial stuff. I think that's only going to go so far, frankly. I think the question is really, in terms of who's going to carry, who is that's going to resonate with, is if there are members of the of advocacy groups for people living in poverty, if there are members of the African American community who speak up against those that type of prosecutorial vigor, because largely those are the people of color who are subject, who are on the other end of that. Okay, if they speak up, I think that it's going to be more of a problem for her than it is if people who are supporting Elizabeth Warren do. Frankly, but let me finish, and then I would say it is really just more of a question of, how compare her programs to those of Elizabeth Warren, compare her programs to those of Bernie Sanders, who are putting real substantive policy proposals on the table that are meant to achieve certain goals. And I would also really, if you really want to be helpful, make it clear that anybody can beat Donald Trump. Because the biggest argument you're going to get with Kamala Harris is that she can win, and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren can't. And that is simply not the case. That's, if you're talking about strategic, that's the way it is. So,
Even though, to me, I think that's kind of a red herring from the establishment, but that's here nor there. But
well, that's what I'm saying. It is here and there, because I think it is a red herring. And the other thing is, and Michael makes his point, that if Bernie wins the nomination, if Elizabeth Warren wins the nomination, if Kamala Harris wins the nomination, if Peter Buttigieg, whatever the guy's name is, wins the nomination,
you got it.
Hillary Clinton's going to campaign with them. And they're going to want Hillary Clinton to campaign with them. All of those people. And so unless you're prepared to say, I'm not voting for that person because Hillary Clinton is being supportive of them, you got to start mentally preparing yourself.
Yeah, you got it. And I say that as someone who does not like we just mentioned Honduras before. I don't like Hillary Clinton, but you got to be real about it. And you also got to realize, inside the Democratic base, I don't know what the latest polls are, but I'm sure if we polled, I'm sure nationally overall she's unpopular, and I'm sure amongst Democrats she still has a favorable rating.
So, final point to end on that one. So you bring that up, but just your thoughts. So back in the midterms when Gillum was obviously the candidate, so I mean, because there were reports that Hillary was helping him as well, and I think on election day he had like a 5-point lead, didn't he?
I don't know, but I know that Nelson did better than him, and Nelson has also got support from Hillary Clinton.
Look to the Bradley effect as to why he underperformed his polls. Definitely not. And again, I've had this debate.
You don't even have to think about this. Nelson did better than him. Do you think that there were a bunch of progressives going, I'm going to vote for Nelson, but I'm not going to vote for Gillum because Gillum had Hillary Clinton help her? No, that's absurd. That's absurd. So, look, honestly, there is this, the hatred for Clinton drives some people to be irrational, and irrationality is not going to be helpful in this situation. So that's the only thing I would tell you. It is not going to be helpful in this situation. There is literally a dozen things that could have happened to Hillary Clinton or could have been done differently by Hillary Clinton, and she would be in her third year of her administration. That any number of those things would have swung 70,000 votes. And so, out of 30 million votes, 70,000. Okay? So, just keep that in mind. Appreciate the call. Wow. My God.
Can't wait to talk about superdelegates again.
Please stop doing these calls because I really, 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 really don't like Hillary Clinton. And I don't appreciate being in a position where you have to clarify obvious things. By the way, I did look up because I wanted to underline the point, and because I assumed she campaigned with Nelson too. Nelson did refuse to campaign with her.
Oh, she did?
So maybe Gillum shouldn't have campaigned with her, but that ain't why he lost to Ron DeSantis. Like, guys, and that's also real. It's both not strategic and it's offensive. He lost because of race. Obviously, he lost to an overtly racist candidate. It's not because he did a hit with Hillary Clinton, and all of a sudden a bunch of people were just like, you know what, I was all for Medicare, but when I saw Andrew Gillum criticize Maduro and campaign from Hillary Clinton, forget it.
When I saw him dab with her on that stage, man, that's when he lost me.
I thought he was a real progressive. I thought he stood with Fidel.
Calling from 916 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Eduardo. I'm speaking from California.
Hey, Eduardo. What's on your mind?
Hi, I've been watching you guys. I'm a new listener. I've been watching you guys for like about a week, so I don't want to make any assumptions of what you guys believe in or not.
Okay.
But I apologize in advance if I do.
All right, fair enough.
I'm a Marxist, and I'm really sort of maybe a bit annoyed or confused with the term democratic socialism, because AOC and Bernie they advocate for social democratic policy.
Right.
But, they use democratic socialism and they don't use any rhetoric of socialism, like,
right.
Workers owning the means of production,
right.
and abolishing capitalism, etc.
Right.
So, to his credit, wouldn't it even be better for him to just say social democracy instead of democratic socialism? Because of the heat that socialism takes in this country?
Well, all right. I would say this. I don't think socialism takes the heat that you think it does anymore. A. B.
Mm-hmm.
I find, that Marxists are far more hung up on the specifics of these terms than your average American voter.
That's true.
I
could say that's true.
I can assure you that he could say, like, I'm a social democrat or I'm a democratic socialist, and 99.9% of the people who are going to vote for anybody left of, Jeb Bush don't care. They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't care. I think, from a purely political perspective, I don't know why, if I was them, I would make that distinction. I think, look, the reality is, I think they are social democrats, to the extent, but that doesn't even mean anything in America, right? People say that stuff is, who used to call themselves, the first person I heard on television call himself a social democrat?
David Brooks.
Lawrence O'Donnell.
Lawrence O'Donnell did. And that was his way of saying, like, oh, right now I think I should be perceived as being to the left of where I am, but in a way that really can't translate one for one in American politics.
Daniel Moynihan,
and
please.
yeah, it doesn't. Here's the thing, and I feel like people who are steeped. I don't want to make a generalization either, but I will. People who are steeped in knowledge of political philosophy feel like it's very important that they label themselves in a very accurate way and that other people label themselves in an accurate way. But most people don't care about that.
I'm an equatorial post-transition communist, just to be clear. But I also I just want to say, like, I think right now, yeah, it totally doesn't matter, and it's, if anything, I mean, it's an amusing distraction for people who care about that stuff at best. On the other hand, I mean, maybe look, I think you could say a couple years ago that, you know, essentially some version of like progressive was as far as you could go, and now I actually would say I think there are some meaningful conversations that aren't totally abstract of a difference between, yeah, I guess we could say social democratic versus liberal progressive politicians. No, I think
the
so my point being,
the substance is different, but
no,
the
point
term is,
no, I agree, but the point I'm making is if we got to a place in 5 or 10 years where there was actually a policy distinction between like essentially debates on how much of the private sector you want to make public, and then all of a sudden those terms became a stand-in for something substantive, that would be cool. But that's not where we are right now.
Yeah, but I even think even then, frankly, I mean, because I got news for you. The word progressive 10 years ago was introduced, or 15 years ago was introduced because people were afraid to call themselves liberal.
Right.
And now it's like, and they weren't afraid themselves to call themselves liberal because they were afraid of being attacked from the left. They were afraid of being attacked from the right. So people started calling themselves progressive as a way of saying, like, I'm not liberal, but not because I'm to the left of liberal. It was because it was just a different term. I mean, these terms are, I think, like, what is important is the policies that they're suggesting, right? And the use of shorthand for these policies, I think that's fine to talk about things from an academic perspective, and perhaps like in a shorthand in the context of people who are heavily steeped in politics. But broadly speaking, the American public don't care. They don't care. They don't care.
They definitely don't care
you're
about
right.
the terminology.
And just a quick shout out. I am Brazilian. I've been living in the United States for about 15 years, and just want to thank you guys for doing a lot of coverage of what's going on in Brazil with Bolsonaro and stuff. It definitely means a lot because, as a Brazilian, I've been pretty much freaking out this past year with all the stuff going on.
I bet.
And so I have a lot of family there. So, yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for covering all of that.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Do you have an opinion, when this was coming up with AOC, if she's a real socialist? There was the thing about the worker owns the means of production, right?
Yeah.
And this might get me in trouble with some people, but I think the Labor Party used common ownership of the means of production instead.
Right.
I think that makes a lot more sense in this context, especially considering environmental... That makes a lot more sense to me considering environmental issues, right? Like, rather than letting industries...
No, I think my only point is that I think the more you move... Like, I think actually labor is a good example because some of the proposals that Corbyn and McDonald have in their manifesto on worker-owned businesses and the other types of things you're talking about is a tick to the left of what is on the table from Sanders right now. And so if you started having people like AOC put out proposals like the government is going to state fund workers taking over their businesses, and that's what I mean by being a whatever. I mean, the terminology is still secondary, but I just think the space you open up.
Yes, because the terminology. I mean, this is specifically. I mean, even more so than that, because
I don't care.
In Britain, they have a parliamentary system of government, and so having that level of specificity is sometimes advantageous. In this country, having that level of specificity is definitely a detriment, because unless we get a system of government where there can actually be coalitions of actual different parties, you don't want to say, like, I am like I'm in a silo the size of a pencil in the context of these other.
That's actually why the only word that I've been pretty adamant about using and trying to detoxify. I mean, Marxism, because I think actually that's just literally like saying, this is an important intellectual tradition and stop being children about it. And then socialist, because socialism means something. And I think, and to me, I mean that in the broadest possible sense. I mean everything from Bernie to Thomas Sankara fits into that category.
I mean, it must, in my opinion, and socialism only has to mean 4 years sort of utopian socialism where everyone lives in 1,600-person communes and run the factory.
Exactly. Yeah, we've totally abolished money.
Marx really messed with the meaning when he came around.
All right. We got time for one more caller. Calling from a 347 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
How's it hanging?
How's it hanging? Saying
I don't know. I'm just saying.
What's up?
My name is Paul. I'm calling from Florida.
Yeah, what's up? How's it hanging down there?
Sam, the reason I'm calling is I don't understand your obsession with Sam Harris. I don't.
Now it's not hanging good, Paul. Not hanging good.
Oh, no, not Paul. Tall. Tet Lamed.
Okay. So you don't understand my obsession with Sam Harris?
No, I don't.
I think you don't understand it if you perceive it as an obsession. I don't know that I've mentioned Sam Harris's name on the show in months, particularly. But if you're asking me,
maybe it's Michael's obsession, but I don't know. I hear you guys.
Well, Michael's writing a book about it, but listen. Here's the problem with him. Let me tell you what I think the problem is with Sam Harris. I think the problem with Sam Harris is that he gives intellectual credence to some very toxic ideas. He gives intellectual credence to some very toxic people. And he does so to people who obviously I have some crossover with in terms of an audience. And so I feel it is my responsibility to make people aware of that.
Okay, well, fair enough. I understand that, and I can understand why you think that about him. But what I'm wondering is, do you think he's intentionally trying to do that? Do you think he has ulterior motives, ill intentions?
Well, I don't care. It's irrelevant. I mean, it's irrelevant to me whether he's doing it because it's irrelevant to me whether he's doing it because he's stupid or he's evil, or he's just looking to make money, or he's a celebrity hound. It doesn't matter.
But do you think he's evil or stupid, or that?
I think he's either stupid or evil, or stupid and evil, or and obviously I'm being a little bit hyperbolic. I don't know that he's evil. I think he's bad person. He just wants fame or wealth, or just is a narcissist. I don't know.
So he's not well intended in what he's saying. Is what.
It doesn't matter. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think that you can be well-intended if you think that the idea is that you're going to write off a billion people as subscribing to an idea that you have decided is fundamentally wrong. I don't know if you can be well-intentioned. Let me finish. I don't know. Wait, let me finish. Let me finish. I don't know if you can be well-intentioned and just, just sort of like whimsically debate whether, provide an apology for torture at an era when we're debating it as a fundamental principle in the country. I don't know if you can be well-intentioned. Maybe you could come up with an argument that you can be well-intentioned and do that, and maybe I could too. But I don't know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't care.
Okay, I still don't understand. I mean, I understand how you have a problem with some of his rhetoric, I guess.
You mean,
I don't understand
what else is there?
Well, maybe it's not you. Maybe it's just Michael, because Michael's the one who's always.
Let me just say this.
But dude, listen. Let me say this. I don't know what your intentions are for calling. I don't know if you're a good person.
Okay,
let me finish.
I'm not.
I'm going to mute you. Listen to me. I'm not going to hang up on you yet. I'm going to give him one more chance to respond.
I have to say something.
But listen, I don't know what your intentions are. You could be a good person. You could be a bad person. You could be a smart person. You could be a dumb person.
We know you're an annoying person.
You could be doing this because you're getting paid by somebody. You could be doing this as a bet or a lark. You could be doing this to impress a man. You could be doing this to impress a woman. You could be doing this so that your dad loves you. You could be doing this because your mom loves you. You could be doing this just because you're bored. It doesn't matter to me. Oh, he hung up. It doesn't matter to me. Oh, wait, maybe he didn't. What number was he calling from? 347. Oh, 347. Oh, yeah, okay. You could be doing it for all sorts of reasons. It doesn't matter. The reality is
You've wasted more of my time than I probably should have allowed, and that's the reality.
Oh no, and here's another reality.
I don't even
come.
say
Wait,
anything.
no,
I don't
mute
have
him
eyes.
again. Mute him again. I gotta say this.
Wait, just say it, and then you can say it. Go ahead. Say your piece.
Me? Are you talking to me or Michael?
You.
I thought Michael had something. No. Well, this is okay. I'll tell you what I'm seeing is that when I look at Harris fans and Harris critics, it seems to me like both of them don't really understand what Harris is saying. I think Harris critics think that he's a Muslim bigot. I can see why they think that, but I also think his fans think he's a Muslim bigot, and they like him for it. And when I've read some of his books, I've listened to some of his podcasts. You know, I familiarize myself with Sam Harris, and I do not see whatever it is that you see and his fans see.
So you're saying that his critics and his supporters think he's a Muslim bigot, but we should all listen to you? All right, let Michael have the final word. I appreciate it.
I'll just say this because, I mean, first of all, I find it in general bizarre, the emotional stakes that people have in this, and I think ad hominems are fun and funny, but the frame that it's an obsession to criticize somebody who unfortunately is an important public figure. I wish he wasn't. I wish he just had a few meditation apps and weird ideas about Muslims and was irrelevant. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that ask us about him. And there's a big poisoning that he has in the culture. We haven't even talked about the bell curve stuff.
Right.
We haven't even talked about the complete misrepresentation, even frankly, of less important areas like Buddhism. So like, and yes, that's another good tip. One thing you do share with his fans is that nobody seems to interpret him correctly, and it's all profoundly unfair.
Right. That is also another critique, that he just tries, he's so slippery that no one can understand him, like God.
Of course, thousands of years of history,
and then
easy to understand.
Middlebrow public. That interview was a pre-tape, right? Was it a pre-tape on Friday? Yeah.
Yeah, Michael Staub.
I did an interview with
Michael Staub.
Was it Michael Staub who was talking about? Oh yeah,
which one?
Who wrote a book about the intellectual history of IQ,
the IQ
race, yes,
mismeasure of man,
and
mismeasurement,
and what Sam Harris did in rehabilitating. Or introducing him to a whole new crew of people who are not, who is reprehensible.
And talking about Murray.
Well, Sam Harrison introducing people to Charles Murray all over again. But then also in mainstreaming people like Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin. And he may have had some hesitancy to be lumped in with those guys. But, for a guy who has so many platforms, maybe I've missed it, where he said, I don't want to be lumped in with them. They have toxic ideas. But, all right. We've run out of time.
And also, but just this notion. I mean, look, it does piss me off. I won't pretend it doesn't piss me off. Obsession, we're obsessed with the presidential candidates. I mean, this is in the lane of what we cover. And just because it hurts your feelings because you have some weird fixation on the guy, there's nothing I can do for you. I'm sorry if it upsets you.
It is funny though, there is something about him that creates a need to be the one to explain
and defend him.
Right.
Yeah.
It's weird.
I think it has something to do with like a rank value of what you think is most important, because the people who think his self-help stuff is like just so good for the world.
I mean, maybe
it outweighs
it is.
everything else.
And what's
that he's
fascinating
ever said.
though is here's a guy who's defending him to his own supporters.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Sam Harris sells himself as like, this is how you understand the complex things. So that's what people are buying. And they're not going to act like they haven't bought it or they haven't like.
I now have his skeleton key as well.
Right, exactly. If I say to you, you're smarter for listening to me, ladies and gentlemen.
That's the Dave Rubin playbook too.
And I, and I don't say it explicitly, or sometimes I do. You're smarter for listening to me. So when you support me, what you're really supporting is the fact that you're smart. Keep that in mind.
That's what Chris Ryan had a thing with him where his fans were trying to like harass him into getting him on the show, And I remember the only salient part of the exchange, though, was like Chris Ryan was like, really the only part of this that's interesting is like, why does it matter to you so much that I like this guy?
It is. I really do think it's that. Like if it's validation. It's validation. Well, with that, folks, we didn't even get to IMs today. I apologize. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid.